Hello guys, welcome to part 4 of our tutorial series on simulation with Arena. Today we're going to be covering queue priority, sets, and schedules. So for today's video, we're not going to be using the old model that we created in the previous videos. So go ahead and pull up a blank slate so we can go ahead and start a brand new model. So let's get started. Let's turn on the grid first, and let's zoom in a little bit as we're pretty far out. And let's put in a create module. And we're going to stick to the parts idea and having machines work on them because it's a pretty simple way to visualize how the simulations work in this program. We'll probably get more in depth in later videos and change our approach. Okay, so let's do like we usually do. Let's put create part, and the entity type is part. Time between arrivals is an exponential distribution with a value of 1 in minutes. And everything's perfectly fine there. So let's start with queue priority. What we're going to do is we're going to have, let's see, how should we do this? Let's put in a decide module. This is just one way you can take and make multiple types of parts, is with the decide module. Alright, so let's connect the create part to the decide module. And let's double click the decide module and let's rename this decide part type. And we'll do two-way by chance, and we're going to make it 50-50. So hit OK. And now what we're going to do is we're going to have one type of part come out here and one type of part come out here. And what we want is to have a process over here, and we want one part to have priority over the other part in the queue. That is the queue line leading up to that process. We want one of the parts to always be ahead of the other type of parts. So let's drag in a couple of assign modules so we can actually designate the different parts. And I've got Smart Connect on. I do not like it, so I'm going to turn that off as well. Oh no, Smart Connect on, Auto Connect off. Delete that there. Don't need that. Get these lined up. All right, and then we're going to come out of the true to this assign module and come out of the false to the other one. Doesn't really matter which is which. We're going to actually rename them. So, all right, so let's call this one part 1 assignment. Let's click add, and we're going to change the entity type in this. So it's going to go from part to part 1. So essentially what's happening here is we've created a part in the create part module, and then it's going to go through the decide part type, and then it's going to go to one of the assign modules, and it's actually going to change the type of entity it is. So part is kind of like a blank slate, whereas part 1 and part 2 are going to be like two different distinctly labeled parts. So hit OK, and we're actually going to add a different picture. So let's do, for part 1, we'll do a green ball. Hit OK. And then also, let's go ahead and add the priority. So how we do that is we want to add an attribute. And I'll show you how to incorporate this later. Let's just call it priority. And a value of 1 is exactly what we want. Hit OK. And I'll explain exactly what that's going to do here shortly. Okay. Let's click the other one. We're going to call it part 2 assignment. And we're going to add another entity type. We're going to call it part 2. Hit OK. And then we're going to change the picture of it as well so we can tell it from the other part. Let's do a red ball for it. Hit OK. And then we don't actually need to put an attribute on part 2 for the priority, because if you'll recall, attributes are by default set to 0, which is what we want it to be for part 2. So we're actually going to be giving part 1 the priority in the queue. All right, let's give our model a save here. And I want to overwrite example 5 where I had been working earlier, but that's what we want to save it as. All right, so now we've got that set up. And now remember, you can go over here to entity, and you'll see we have our 3 entities here. And our blank part, let's change it to a yellow ball. So we know anything yellow has not been, it's either part 1 or part 2, but logically it hasn't been defined as such until it gets into this decide module and reaches one of these assignment modules. Now, remember we put a different entity picture to the entities in here. And notice that the initial pictures for those are reports. We can actually leave that because this is only if the entity is initialized in a create module, which these are not. These are decided later, and so therefore they won't actually have this by default. So we can just leave that, and the pictures will be assigned here. So that's all we need to do there. So let's move on to actually putting the process in and learning how to make the priority work. So bring in a process module, double click it, and let's call it machine works on parts. Oops, not party. Type is standard, and it's going to be seize delay release as usual. And now what we're going to do is click add. We're going to do a resource. We're going to do just machine, and there's just going to be one required to get the job done. Then we're going to do delay type, and triangular's fine. I'm just going to leave the default values here because we're not actually worried about it, except we're going to change this to minutes because we're working with a base time unit of minutes. Hit OK, and that's all set. Now notice that a queue is created here, and if you left click on it, it'll tell you what it's called. Machine works on parts.queue. Simple enough. So let's go ahead and we are actually going to take and merge these paths onto this process module. So what would happen currently is the parts would move through, and whichever one got here first, it would get the next position in the queue. So even if part 1 came in after a part 2, part 1 would be behind part 2, which is not what we want, if you recall. So what we do is go over here and hit Q. And let me make these a little bit bigger. Maybe that'll help you see them on the video. We're going to go to Q, and down here you'll notice our queue. We only have one in our system right here. It comes up down here, and the type is set to first in, first out. And that's exactly, that works exactly like I was saying. If part 1 comes in, it'll get the next position in the queue, and then whoever's at the front of the queue will be the first out. So it's first in, first out. Simple as that. What we want is highest attribute value. So if you recall, we set a priority attribute up earlier, so you can pull down the attribute name and click on priority, and there it is. So what it'll do is this queue is going to check and see who has the highest attribute value set to priority. Since part 1 is always going to have a value of 1, it's always going to get priority in this queue. Therefore, it's going to move to the front of it. And if you want to see this happen, you can go ahead and pause the video or try it later. Just put it in a dispose module and run it and watch the queue. And if the queue is not actually building up, you can go in here and up the time that it takes to do the process. I don't really know how long it'll take without playing around with it. But that is how you can do queue priority. That's a really simple way to do it. You also can have just 2 create modules here creating 2 different parts. That should give you the same logic, but we're going to stick to this logic for now. This works perfectly fine as well. Okay, next on our list is sets. So what exactly is a set? If you'll click on set here, you'll see that we have none right now. But essentially what a set is exactly that. It's a set of usually resources. It can also be other things, but we're going to stick to resources for now as we are still working on pretty simple models. So what we want to do is we're going to have 2 machines working on parts here rather than just one. So rather than have 2 different process modules, we want a set of machines contained here. So we're going to double click, and you'll notice that we have a type and a name. So let's name this machines, and the type is going to be resource. And like I said, you can have other things here, but we're going to stick to resource for now. And then you have your members here. So let's go ahead and click on that, and you'll have a spreadsheet come up. So double click and let's add a couple of rows. And let's do machine 1 and machine 2. Hit enter and close this. Alright, so now our set is created, and how we're going to incorporate that is we're going to double click our process module here, and we're actually going to delete this resource, and we're going to click add. Now instead of the type being resource as it usually is, we're going to change it simply to set. Then we're going to choose our set of machines, quantity that it takes to get the job done is still 1, and then you have selection rule. And these are pretty easy to explain. Cyclical is going to be basically a cycle, as it suggests. That is, machine 1 will get a job, and then machine 2 will get the next job, machine 1 will get the next job, and so on. Random is pretty self-explanatory. Preferred order, that's going to be, you can set up basically what machines you want to work first, and usually this is done with attributes and such. We're not going to worry about that right now. And you can do a specific member, and that can be useful for when a part needs reprocessed and it needs to come back through the same machine. I'll probably cover that in a later video. Largest remaining capacity, that's pretty obvious. That's not really applicable here because both of our machines only have a capacity of 1 right now. And smallest number, busy. That's pretty self-explanatory as well. But we're going to stick to cyclical as the most simple. Then you have a save attribute here. We're going to leave it blank because we don't need it, but what this does is it's actually going to take and make an attribute on whatever entity has come through the system, and it's going to save a number in this attribute that is basically the machine that worked on it. So say we put just machine there, that'll probably work. And let's say it went through and machine 2 worked on it. Well, it would have an attribute called machine on that entity that would have a value of 2. But we're going to leave it blank. We don't need that. Hit OK. Delay type's the same. Hit OK. And now you're all set. But you do need to animate it. But in this tutorial video, we're going to skip animation. But if you want to animate this, you can actually see the 2 parts in action. You should be able to follow the guidelines that were set in my last video. You just do it for the 2 different resources, and then you can place little boxes here or pictures of machines, however you want to do it. And of course, if you have any questions, you really want to do that, you can ask me and I'll try to help explain it. Okay, so that's how you use sets. And finally, we want to look at schedules. So what exactly can a schedule do? It can basically schedule different events. And the different things that you can schedule are inner arrival times. So you can schedule exactly when parts come into the system. This can be useful when you've gathered data from the field, and you actually went out and timed when something arrived into a system, and you want to recreate that exact situation and then look at different ways that your machine will handle it based on how you tweak it. But usually that's not the case. Usually we like to keep things random because we usually don't know the true situation. We don't know exactly what happened or is going to happen in the real world because everything's infinitely random in the real world. Usually what we're going to do is use it for resources, especially people resources. It can also be used for machines, and that's what we're about to do here. So to do it, what we do is, you probably guessed it, click the schedule button over here, and let's add a new schedule. And let's call it machine 1 schedule. We're going to give machine 1 a schedule of his own. The type is capacity, and notice you have arrival, and you also have other. Other can be used to make completely custom things, but that's more advanced stuff, so let's not worry about that for now. So we're going to leave it to capacity, which is what we want. And we're going to change the time unit to, let's do minutes. Scale factor of 1 is what we want. And notice you have durations here. If you click this, here is the window that comes up. Now, what this is actually a chart, and you can take and interact and set the schedule how you want it. See, this is very handy, but there are a few limitations, which I'll get to in just a second. So let's change all these to 0 again. And let's go to options. And time slot duration of 1 minute is fine. And let's see, how long were we running? We'll do a 30-minute run, so we can do a 30-minute range. That's how long you schedule. Calendar speed 1 is okay. The y-axis maximum does not need to be 10. We're going to set it to 2 because, well, our capacity is never going to go over 1. And I don't want to set it to 1 because I want you to be able to see it going up and down easier. The minimum, of course, is 0. Snap spacing is 1. That's what we want. And this is if you're doing different, if the run is longer than the schedule, this is how it will react after it's run its course. All right, so hit apply, and you'll notice it changed there. So if we did this, that would mean that it's at capacity 1 all day, or all of the half hour that we're running the system. Well, we want to vary it. We want to give it some breaks. Because at this point, this pretty much does the same thing as a fixed capacity. So let's say at 5 minutes, he gets a 5-minute break. Then at 25 minutes, he gets another 5-minute break. Okay? So hit OK, and watch what happens here. Notice that we get 3 rows, when really we need 4 because we have, well, let me just show you the spreadsheet. If you'll right-click and go to Edit via Spreadsheet, you'll have a spreadsheet come up. And notice that we have the value of the capacity and how long it lasts in this view. Well, notice there should be a 4th one here of 0 for 5 minutes because we put that break at the end of it, correct? If you go back and look, there's a break here. See, this is the 1st row, this is the 2nd row, 3rd row, and then there should be a 4th row here. But there's a problem with the program, and that is if you have 0 as your last slot here, it will not register into the schedule. So what you got to do is go to Edit via Spreadsheet, pull this down, put in a 0 for the value, and then the duration was 5 minutes. Now hit Enter and then close this. And notice it says 4 rows now. And this is something frustrating, but you cannot click on this button again because if you do, watch what happens. I'll hit OK. It goes back to 3 rows. It takes that away. And we can't undo that, so you have to go back in here every time. So keep this little annoyance in mind and make sure you don't make any mistakes. Alright, so the schedule is all set. I'm going to give this another save. And how we apply the schedule is what we do is we go to the resource button over here. And rather than it being fixed capacity, meaning it's always capacity 1, we're going to pull this down and put based on schedule. And notice it says schedule name here. If we pull this menu down, you should see machine 1 schedule that we created just a moment ago. Now, you've got some other things that you don't have to worry about right now. Schedule rule is really important. I urge you to look up what this does. I may cover it in a future video, but I don't know for sure if I will. So you may want to look up exactly how that works. But we're just going to leave it as wait for now. So in order to complete our system, with all this logic that we've put in now, we just need a dispose. So put in a dispose, you can call it dispose of parts, hit OK, and that'll come out of the process module. So there you have a system that incorporates sets, schedules, and queue priority. So what you want to do at this point, now that you've completed the system, is you want to go back and run this. So first you need to go to Run, Setup, And then you need to go to replication parameters. Number of replications 1 is okay. And then replication length, we're going to set to 30 minutes. And then base time units you want in minutes as well, so you can easily read your report. Everything else is okay. And you're basically now ready to run. So in order to see the logic, however, you may need to come in and play with some of these times, delay times and inner arrival times back here. So that way you can watch the queue build up and you can see how different things affect other things. Everything's interactive in these simulations, so it's always a good idea to play around with them. So that's the logic. It's up to you now to go and play with it. So I appreciate you joining me, and hopefully part 5 will be coming soon. And I do apologize for the delay it took to get this video out. I hope you enjoyed. Please press like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.